There we go. Whenever it says that, it feels so official. Be very careful about what we say now. Um, anyways, so let's just jump in. I am excited that we're back here together and having Claire join us, that I've introduced, and I will each time that I've got, Claire and Omnia as co-hosts here. And in the coming weeks, you'll see how we get to start to play that out a little bit more. And then we've got Justin here from the Working Genius team that's going to be always being able to chime in with some insights from where he sits. And today we've got Claire that we're going to be, she's just to, I'm not going to remember because she's a vice president of marketing at AmerisourceBergen, and you're the title that follows that. You'll have to help me with because there's a few words there.
Human health community providers. So that our downstream sort of customer groups. So pharmacy, physician, and health systems.
Awesome. Thank you. And so Claire was probably one of the first ones that, we introduced it broadly at AmerisourceBergen when we first started there, she was like, ooh, at least that was my experience of what I saw happen in you. And like very quickly, not surprising as she's a DG, was starting to galvanize this and get really excited about it and enroll her team, and then started enrolling the business and whatnot. So I continue to watch in awe from the sidelines to witness how innate it is. I'm calling her nickname now is like Master G, because she's amazing at discernment. But like the G to me, even though you're a DG, I feel like your G stands out, maybe because there's it's not it's rare, maybe more rare than the D is the G within your environment. So total master G, and excited to talk today about what your experience has been.
Well, thank you. I'm certainly like blushing a little bit. I have to say that my immediate adoption of Working Genius as my new religion was not limited to, least of which I didn't realize I was galvanizing all the time, not just at work. So that was like a major revelation for my life in general. How many times Donna probably said to me during sessions, like, well, of course you're exhausted. You were galvanizing for 8 days with your family on vacation. Like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like,
but it also fuels you and gives you joy.
It does. It absolutely does. Like, people leadership is really the thing that I lights me up a lot, and sort of bringing people together. And even that sort of expansive title I have at AmerisourceBergen is really about bringing 3 teams together. So the timing of being immersed in the Working Genius could not have been better, as we looked to really bring 3 disparate teams together. Disparate meaning just we aligned to 3 separate business segments. So, we talk about silos. It was not a negative thing. In fact, we, were siloed in a way that was very high functioning and high rewarding, right? So aligned to individual business segments. So each marketing team aligned to the pharmacy segment or the hospital segment or the physician segment, and was very successful within their microcosm, right? Within that system, things were going well. And certainly as we just sort of continued to scale, I think anyone in healthcare during the pandemic has experienced like a 30% surcharge in volume of work. Like, there is just more that we do that's part of our everyday now. So we started to look at the system and say, like, how can we create just more bandwidth, more synergy, more joy for people who, frankly, like, again, you don't have to be in healthcare to be burnt out from sort of like work from home, sort of like constant pressures at home and at work, sort of stacking up, right? One thing I talk to my team a lot about, like, it's okay if it feels heavy right now. It's heavy. We're holding a lot. We're carrying a lot. So bringing these 3 teams together, the Working Genius was a big part of it. So even just from day one of bringing new team leaders together, we were sharing our purpose work, sharing our Working Genius letters, talking about our styles and where and how we, like to work and how we can work together. So there was an immediate level of synergy on my leadership team that unsolicited several people expressed having not experienced before, right? So the idea of sort of everyone's understandably cautious typically when you would bring folks into a new environment, right? Like kick off a leadership team with me as a new person to most of them. And, it was a really exciting and vulnerable experience too, because I went first, right? I will practice what I preach and share my purpose and my, working genius and how excited I am by all of that. And it really gave us, and you've heard this as a theme throughout, like it gave us common language to really sort of be able to connect and a certain level of trust in the system, right? Because the investments that the organization made and all of us having the opportunity to have had access to the assessment. And I don't want to criticize DISC or any of those other systems. I think different folks find value, but like I can't retain that level of information in my day-to-day life. Like I've taken the DISC assessment 4 times, right, throughout my career. I can never remember my letters, but Working Genius, just like it was innate, almost immediately, because it just makes so much sense. So that to me was a really big aspect of the adoption, and it's sort of like Donna's right. Like I've been proselytizing teams. Like I talk about it all the time. So we have IT folks that are getting involved. We have folks in our financial modeling team, and that just having, whether it was through like, hey, I mentor someone in their team and they were talking to their leaders about it. It's really been exciting to see it sort of roll out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the timing of it all, and especially because your world got so expansive in such a short period of time. And I want to kind of think about a little bit, first and foremost, this model is a self-awareness model.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would love for you to share a little bit about, for you, what it was like on a self-awareness, like seeing yourself through this lens and then seeing your system through this lens of like, what did you notice?
Yeah. So it was interesting because I think particularly as a leader, people leader through the pandemic, right? You were giving a lot of support. A lot of time was spent, I think, giving support and creating buy-in and I think of myself as a storyteller, right? I'm doing the translation and storytelling of our business and what we do to our teams, but also out to our customers. So making sure the teams are bought in, and that work, right, is actually galvanizing, and was I would feel like really good about my day, but really, really tired. And I didn't have an ability to like put words to that tiredness. So sort of like coming to the end of a 10-hour day on team calls and just like, oh God, I feel like a wrung out dish sponge. Like what is going on? And like not realizing that it's okay. Number one, it was okay because I was like lit up and energetic all day long. And my husband, whose office is immediately above mine, would be like, I hear you down there. You're really into what's going on. Like I hear positive tones and like energetic. I can't hear what you're saying, but the tone of your voice is definitely good. So that was the one thing I noticed for myself. And I think it also explained to me too, and this was prior to this like sort of expanded role, as I was looking to mentor team members, I'm surrounded by, as Donna mentioned in the invite, like just ETs, everybody at it's very common, not only in AmerisourceBergen, but especially on the team I was leading at the time, like ETs all day long. They're an amazing, high performing, like churn that ET is my working frustration. So it feels good, but I also didn't know how to articulate my sense from a discerning aspect of like, why do I feel like I have to be on every single call with the team, right? Like they're very successful individuals, they're very smart, but it felt like, particularly in this like new virtual environment, that I had to be the one on the call to make sure things went well, not understanding or even having an inkling of how to train or translate that. Like I was admittedly baffled when I started the purpose work with Donna. Like I don't know what it is. I know that when I'm on calls, they go smoothly. We get to the point. It's that middle section. And without knowing that, I also couldn't train it in my team members. And honestly, was feeling that pressure, like the emotional weight of that as a leader was exhausting. So in the initial engagement with Donna, just like that just lifted off. Like, oh, they're ETs. You just have to ask them. Put discerning on their checkbox. Like they need a to-do list, and discerning needs to be one of the boxes. You have to just ask them to do it, or ask them to slow down and galvanize. And there's folks, that may have it as a competency or are interested in advancing in leadership. So like, then I was able to do that. So that was a major lift too. Like it really gave me an ability to empower team members and step back from just the grind of the meetings all day. So that was really helpful. I'm still in meetings all day, but different ones.
Yes. And I'm imagining, as you're saying that, I'm picturing being Omnia right now, and how much of that was resonating for you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Honestly, every single word that you said make a lot of sense. I feel like I'm the one speaking right now because it's very similar experience. Yeah. So the discerning part in particular, like it used to exhaust me a lot because I felt like the need to go and be on every single call. And sometimes I feel like, oh, you don't need me there. You're very like high capable people. And then I miss on a call and then I come back, I was like, oh my God, they screwed up. I just feel it. I know it. Like I needed to be there. But just also to find the word and know exactly when to call me in. I'm like, guys, you only need me either for the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes. So decide where should I come in. So I still go to calls, but they know exactly when the decision need to happen and when to run it by me. And then I reduce the amount of hours I spend every single day talking to them.
Yeah. It is, that middle piece is, and I said that in a couple of my video posts too, is that it's not that it wasn't there before, it just wasn't conscious and deliberate. So it was often that I think those that have that innateness were almost having to force it in everywhere. Otherwise, an idea would just get implemented, and then you end up in, I call recycle versus iterative, which is, why it's so important to be intentional about that.
I agree.
So, Claire, I know you've done some other things to get quite creative at AmerisourceBergen with regards to, the sourcing of initiatives and things like that. Can you share a little bit about how you've gotten creative with the model?
Yeah. So one of the things that, as we thought about sort of aligning team members around working genius capabilities, or just really thinking about burnout in terms of, burnout isn't necessarily workload, but I mean, it is, but sometimes it's more about being in your working frustration, right? So sort of that sort of spiral of that. So as we thought and looked across the team, out of sheer necessity and frustration, one day I shot an email to my whole team and said, I need a human being to do X. Like we have no human beings. I need someone to manage the digital program with one of our media partners. And it's ET, and it was like my frustration sitting on my to-do list. I didn't want to do it. It was like hanging out. I just needed someone to do it. And like out of sheer frustration, sent an email out. And one of my ETs, like a couple levels down, was like, I would love to do that. And it was like, oh yes. Okay. So I can also be aware of like a stretch project for I'm not punishing somebody else because it's my working frustration. It is actually an incredible stretch opportunity. And I admittedly didn't realize that until that person sent me a lengthy email thanking me for the privilege and opportunity of working on that project, that I was like stunned. Like I couldn't even imagine. Like it was such a light bulb moment, right? Like, and it was amazing. This young woman is very talented. She's continuing to lead that. And it just really blew the doors wide open for me to like, we are not good. We're going to disregard reporting lines. Like we want people working on projects anywhere that they can fit it in. And, we did sort of within my smaller initial group before I had an expanded role, a couple times we did this sort of just like email. So I had somebody on my team that was wonder and invention is their working frustration. So they sent an email to the whole team and said, hey guys, I need ideas for this project. Just send them my way, right? Nothing fancy, like just send me emails, stream of consciousness, whatever ideas you got around X. So we realized like he was tagging into the WI folks, right? He was getting out of his frustration, getting over a speed bump by doing that. So that was really fantastic. And then, so it was like another random incident. So as we looked at like, how can we do that intentionally? So one of the things we're getting ready to roll out is it's called our internal crowdsourcing project. So got folks like Jennifer Clark, who I also fellow DG, as she was having similar conversations, like how do we get the folks a couple levels down to even be aware of a need or the fact that a project exists that they may want to be interested in. Like, oh, I'd love to do some copy editing, or hey, I have a background in podcasting. I'd love to do that for you, right? Stuff that she and I as leaders are going like, oh my God, I need a body against this. Like, we're out of people. What do we do, right? So it really was interesting to be able to then enlist across the team, other folks to be a part of this and sort of create a structure for internal crowdsourcing. Now we have to launch it and roll it out. We're actually hoping to do it in the next couple weeks. We lost a little bit of time, but using a Teams, like existing platform, a Teams channel, put that together with another partner from IT, our marketing technology lead, who hadn't done the Working Genius, who we said, hey, why don't you do it so you can experience this? He did it, loved it, is having his whole team do it, and was helping us build the platform for the internal crowdsourcing initiative. So it's essentially like, we call them job seekers and job posters. So like normalizing, raising your hand if you want to learn new things, normalizing that it doesn't mean you have a terrible manager just because you're like, I'd like to do something else. And also normalizing asking other folks to do things across and outside of any reporting lines or team structures, right? Regardless of the audience they serve. And we've just had a couple of we've had those sort of anomalies. So we've been doing this in a one-off way, but we're really excited to launch this really broadly. And I don't want to put Jennifer on the spot, but I'd love, if you have any thoughts to add there, since you're a big part of it.
I know it's definitely something that has come up time again with my team. My team is very heavy in the wonder, the innovation, like D's and G's, and not so much in the last half and getting things done. So we're really good at picking what it is we should be doing and wondering about what we should be doing, but not so good on actually doing the things. And so this has also helped to find those people who are great and have processes set up and have tools in place to be able to go and tap on them and say, how do you track your projects? How are you tracking status? How are you reporting that up and finding those people as well? Because I have a bunch of wonders, they want to wonder and they want to brainstorm, and they want a group of people to throw ideas out to and get energized with. And this, my hope is that this will give them that platform to kind of raise their hand and say, you're looking for a brainstorm, I can lead that. I can take that on. I'll come back to you with some recommendations on how to do that. So I'm very excited on where we can get this.
Well, it's I want to acknowledge just the idea of being able to do that, whether or not you're as big as you guys are, or I can imagine, Ryan, for you on your end with a smaller team or group, it's to get work done that affects everybody. Sometimes these initiatives, it's not always obvious where and who should be involved in different projects and bringing them, pulling them through. And in my experience, in other companies I've worked for or that are clients, is that a lot of times the same people end up getting called upon to do projects over and over and over again, versus being quite mindful of what kind of project is it and what kind of genius is needed here, ideally, and how do we move this forward. So I'll just invite Ryan, when you think about it from a Kyber's perspective, can you imagine being able to source projects from that perspective?
Potentially. I mean, I think it's an interesting way to think about getting people to chime in, right? Like where resources are needed or where there's a constraint, and thinking through the things you're asking without making the assumptions, right? Because I think that's what I'm hearing is brought new people to light that would have expertise in something. And I think in a small team, it can be really difficult when your entire company is, less than 20 people. People have specific roles and time for things, but I do think that, we're very invested in using Working Genius. So if the next time there is an opportunity to say, who would be the right person for X, Y, or Z thing, to be able to ask people to participate rather than say you're on the short list of people that can take on this task. I think it might be interesting to see the response.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
The other thing, just to add to that, the other thing that I found interesting is even with this, you're not even asking, right? You're allowing them to ask to be included and raise their hand for those stretch opportunities. Because the podcast example is one that I've brought up a few times where we had a podcast in an area of our business. I didn't love the idea, and it was taking up a lot of resources and not showing a lot of benefits. But I had somebody on my team that was like, I love that. I've done that previously. I want to do it. I will do it in the evening as a stretch, like passion project. Will you allow me to do that? It's like, of course, if that's going to fill your cup, then let's move things around and make that a possibility for you. And she's like, just let me try knowing what I know to see if it does work, or are we just not taking advantage of it the way we should be? Mm-hmm. So it's allowing other people, like not asking people, but allowing them to volunteer themselves.
Yeah, it's such a great call out, because part of the research that I did just on my own before we launched this initiative was sort of looking at, and it happens a lot. I don't know if anybody's in an IT environment, but it happens a lot in IT, right? Like the idea of crowdsourcing is very common when you're coding large projects or working on large projects, right? So there is a lot of data out there about the value of self-identifying and volunteering. So folks that raise their hand to do stretch projects and raise their hand to be part of these things, often, and I forget all the stats because I haven't looked at it in a while, but like they contribute better, faster work than, you know, you would get from other folks. So like the idea of that you're not volunteering folks for it, right? They get to opt in. Mm-hmm. And that is very powerful. And I think also thinking about that term bore out, right? So battling that boredom and like the tedium of like the repetitive tasks. So just giving someone something different to do that, you know, lights them up can be so helpful. And it's helping surface. Our hope too is like the crowdsourcing platform and that interaction will be the baseline as folks start to get to know each other, because it sort of also becomes an interactive database of like people's experiences, their working genius. We are thinking about creating, we've been talking about a pod squad. So like everybody wants to do podcasting, right? It is very time consuming. So there's a handful of folks that love it, like Jennifer said. And like we were like, hey, can y'all be in charge of podcasting for everybody? Because nobody has time, or, you know, if you guys love it, like great. So that's another thing, was we're thinking a little bit differently about these like cross-functional SWAT teams or pods or squads, whatever you want to call them. And that's a model that I'm deploying across the 3 teams that I lead as well. So, hey, like we got a content squad, we've got folks that are aligned around digital, we've got folks, you know, we're talking about podcasting next. That's actually going to be bigger than my team. That'll be more cross-functional. So thinking about just being empowered to create cohorts around different aspects of the business that, while not necessarily specific to working genius, we wouldn't have even considered had we not had this common language and ability to understand, I think, in myself, and then understand it in my team members.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm curious, Justin, you hearing this, have you heard other examples out there of how maybe others are using crowdsourcing like as a means to lean into the model?
No, I think you guys are bleeding edge. So kudos for that. What resonates with me in particular is just the irresistibility of an opportunity to be in your genius sometimes. I mean, I think sometimes, I don't want to over apply the model, because there are days when you've got 15 hours of work and you can't take anything on, but this is close to one of those days for me personally. And just even still, I had a consultant I know send me an email first thing in the morning saying, God, I'm stuck on this one thing I'm trying to figure out. I haven't done it before. And I've had some experience doing that, and enablement being one of my geniuses. I couldn't stop myself from pulling my phone up, texting her 4 ideas, dropping that and sending that saying, I can't help you more, but when we talk next week, let's go over it. You know, and her response was, this just saved me 5 hours of work. This is incredible, right? And it's the highlight of my day. I got so much energy from that. So like that bored out, you know, Claire, that idea of how do you spike people's, just like in a presentation, you want to spike people's attention. I think in your day-to-day, particularly when we're exhausted and we have so much weight that we're carrying, giving ourselves these little especially the little spikes, you know, like Jennifer, when you can just come, if I got to go run a wonder meeting for people for 30 minutes, and then I could walk away and have no obligation to do any other piece of the work, like that couldn't be better. You wouldn't have to pay me for that. So that's I again, it's bleeding edge, but I think it's also really it's such a pure example of what the intentions of the model are, is to give people more opportunity to be fulfilled in their work. And what the table group has been doing for 20 years has been about that. And this is such a fast, quick way to get people to it. If you don't mind, I'm going to share this with the team, because I think they're going to light up about it. So
Absolutely. Well, we are recording it too, so you're more than welcome to share not just the idea, but that as well. And I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit into what you touched on earlier, and I did even in the invite, is that Claire, you're leading, and so many other people actually at AmerisourceBergen too are leading a lot of ETs. And then, if I reflect and zoom out across all my clients, and then even zoom back into our fellowship group, which is, I believe, just shy of 30 people that have been invited so far into it, no one's an ET. A lot of people have E or T, but not ET. And so it's an interesting observation. And of course, I have my own story sometimes about, well, is it true that there's not that many ETs that want to or even naturally navigate into people leadership because they're really getting joy out of leading work rather than people? But I just love to hear your thoughts on like what you're observing now that you're aware of this pattern and what comes up for you in your stories about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think we certainly have ETs that have leadership aspirations on the team. And I think it's really, I think without this language, an ET, in my observation, will do all the things and never pause to, not never, will be too busy, right? So immersed in the need to complete those tasks that they're assigned, and often with noble intent, right? So a business leader asks for something, they add it to the running list, right? So that just sort of has a cumulative effect and creates a hamster wheel. So it's not that the work they're doing isn't meaningful. I don't want to imply that, but it's never ending. So the ability to pause and say, hey, can I step back and be curious and ask more questions before I just do this thing, this task you've given me or requested of me, because I love checking boxes and it does light them up to be completing these tasks and doing these things, right? So checking the boxes, turning things out, being the one that you could, I get it back to you so fast you can't even believe it, right? So, but is that the best thing for the system and for their own personal balance and work-life balance, right? Like that becomes a lot to hold. And it becomes, I've seen too, I feel at certain levels of the organization, like I see my ETs like overwhelmed because they couldn't possibly take a vacation or take days off or be sick because what about all these tasks that no one's going to do, right? Like, and it's been empowering to sort of de-escalate. And I spend a lot of my time with a heavy team, like talking about, you need to be curious, you need to ask why, you need to try and unpack a little bit about the need. And also saying later, like, I can't do that right now. I can do that next quarter. So one of the things we're implementing is quarterly alignment exercises where we take the laundry list of stuff. Y'all asked us for all of this, and we've already said we were going to do all this in support of your business objectives, but you also asked for all this. So you just tell us what the most important things are, and we will execute the hell out of those things, right? So like, it's really creating a structure for the ETs to have, if they can't discern, if discerning is challenging, and not because they're not smart enough or intelligent or any of that, but sometimes, maybe they don't have the broader view of the organization to feel safe discerning. And I think it's also about like, we're asking them not to do the thing that makes them feel good. And that's a tough balance, right? So sort of creating structures that allow them in a structured way to say like, here's the discerning, you're going to tell me what you want, we're going to do all those things, and sort of like working through that. And then also, like I said, that hamster wheel of like getting a second to pause and go like, hey, I had this thought, or I observed this, and having a pause to float that up is really helpful. And I will also say that the Working Genius de-escalated for me my personal frustration, right? So I think we tend to, as leaders that are not ETs, to be like, what the hell, guys? Like, why do I got to be the one that tells you how to galvanize or asks these thoughtful questions? And so it's helped me realize that, like, no, you have to assign that to the ETs. You have to assign discerning. You have to assign galvanizing. And not to a point of burnout, but you have to say, like, this is a priority for you to be doing as you're doing your ET work. And it's my job to do that because I'm the DG. So that's, it sort of de-escalates the intent for everybody. Nobody's not trying. Nobody's just, I know when I'm in a bad space because I have this moment where I'm like, I can't be the smartest person in this room. And the answer is you're not the smartest person in this room. You're just the only DG and you're feeling that. So that's what gets frustrating. So that's how I sort of like, that's my tell. Like, if I think that and it happens, I go, okay, I'm gonna step back, take a minute. But so that's some of the thoughts around ETs. And I think it is an interesting, sort of anecdotally, right? It is interesting, right? And I attributed initially at our company to say, like, hey, we're just really ET heavy. So like, it makes sense that like a DG, DEs, IWs, whatever float to the top, like organically, but maybe that's like a system we need to be like mindful of, because we also can't have everybody like burning out and spinning out, carrying the weight of the to-dos for the entire organization. So it's something that I'm thinking about a lot right now.
Mhm. Well, when you say that, what comes up for me, and I've actually reflected on a lot of you have heard me say that, like I look at it like if anybody is compartmentalized in any of these, like what they've got their geniuses in ideation, activation, or implementation. So is that if they're in the ideation, it's that you innately lead ideas. If it's in the activation, you innately lead people. And if it's in the implementation, you innately lead work. But our organizational structure is built such that any kind of leadership means leading people, right? And to your point, like, I think there are, I have not met a lot of like executive leader level ETs. I do know some, I coach some. They're in the minority, but they've had to learn to be deliberate about, it's not that they can't do the activation piece, it's that they start to realize, oh, okay, this is innate. And this is something that I need to be deliberate about. And what I think every ET has corrected me on is that they don't really align to the language that their geniuses bring them joy. Because they often end up heroing, like that's a big place of heroing. So there's a responsibility, a heavy responsibility that comes with that almost robs the joy because there's just so much, right? So I don't know if it's just my population of ETs that I hear that from, but I was really excited, and I know Stacy brought this up at one point, that they changed the pairing from dutiful finisher to loyal finisher, because it's coming from a place of loyalty much more than duty. But I think sometimes it feels like duty when it's too much. That's the story I make up. But I'd love to hear from others too on what you're thinking, your thoughts are on this sort of distinction about what it's like to be an ET, and the role they play, how challenging that could be sometimes. Anyone? What about you, Derek? You've got the T in you.
Well, as I'm listening to the conversation, something that's been kind of coming up in me, even in my personal life, understanding from the Working Genius model about the DT, is that I'm always in this constant battle. Like there's like a sense of tension, because I really like checking boxes. I love getting things done. I love moving that forward as best as I can. But then that discernment comes up, and it's like, that's not the right thing. Got to go back to start. No, it's not the right thing. It's not the right thing. Now I get to this point where I get really, really frustrated because I haven't figured out a way to check the box in the right way. So looking at it from on my team, there's a lot of T's, you know, and especially on the animal health side of AmerisourceBergen, there is a lot of people that just, you know, we get shit done. It's just how we do it. And there has not been a lot of focus on that discernment. And it's really hard, you know, you have to implement processes in those places to make sure that that's happening. And I don't know, you know, the crowdsourcing thing, it's kind of an interesting idea. It's just, you know, how do you implement it, or how do you know if this is the right moment for that, or if you start implementing a process and it just becomes the same thing over and over and over again, just like the hamster wheel reference, Claire, you know, how can you not create new silos, take down silos, just create new silos, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the you know, there's no one solution for it. And one thing we talked about as a program team around, or project team around the internal crowdsourcing is entering into it in the spirit in which it was intended. So like talking about the mindset that we're all bringing to it, which is the intent of you know, sort of working with folks outside the usual suspect list, right? And getting folks candidly, like further down in the organization, the opportunities to work on things and see, just have visibility to what's going on. I mean, that's another piece of it, right? So it is sort of in the spirit of collaboration, a little bit of, you know, we still have to implement it. So I want to be careful about that. We have it, like we have some things we want to measure, some KPIs we've identified as like, you know, we want to do some satisfaction surveys for both sides of the universe, right? Sort of like modeling this carefully as we think about, you know, are they long-term engagements? Are they short-term? And really thinking about the onus on the entire system, the collective, to again enter into it in the right spirit. And that's a big piece of the level set to ensure it's really, really done again in that spirit, and not you know, that's where that volunteer aspect is so important too, right? So folks that are saying like, I would like to do this, and again normalizing and in that spirit of intent saying like, yes, it's okay to ask, it's okay to say that, it's also okay to say not right now, you know, I can't do anything right now. So I think sort of empowering the team members too, I think is a big piece of it. I don't think there's like I don't think that's an exact answer to your question, because we're still working through it, but something we can continue to share out. I think in the use cases we've seen, it's really been nothing but upside, right? Like energy for the jobs seeker who is excited to work with a different team and get a new skill set, or bring expertise from a previous job that they haven't gotten to deploy. And then also the job posters who, you know, as people leaders, there's an immediate relief when you're like, yes, we have this covered. Or, you know, but also just sort of, again, see a team member energized. So yeah, we're going to continue to watch that and look at some of those scores. And certainly Jennifer, if you have anything to add there, as you've seen it on your team too.
Yeah, I think we're still working through, you know, trying out new things and testing how it works. We're talking a small team of, there's 4 of us in total. So, you know, we're just kind of moving things around and testing different ways of working and seeing how it works.
Awesome.
Donna, can I give you a little feedback on ETs as leaders?
Yes.
So in my ecosystem, I've experienced ETs as leaders, and I'm not saying this is every ET, I'm thinking of one specifically. Sometimes those types of leaders can be seen as taskmasters, micromanager type leaders, right? And the feedback on their leadership style is not always ideal, because when you're working with a team of ETs and you are also an ET, you're just that one extra layer of like cracking the whip and making sure I check every box instead of me already being an ET. I already know I need to check every box, right? So that sometimes creates challenges for ETs in being leaders. And as a leader, a lot of time our roles, it's very necessary to do some of those higher level, the WIs, the Ds and the Gs.
Mhm.
And it's usually a little bit harder for that ET to shift mindset into that than it is for a DG, IW, whatever that mix-up may be, to turn that switch on to execute, right?
Yeah.
So that's just been my experience in knowing ET leaders.
That makes a lot of sense, right? And I love the way you contextualize that, because it is, you know, even if we think about the playfulness of the above and below the line that I tried to apply to each pairing, and below the line in ET is a nag, right? And that's often how they'll get experience, just like a DG is a bit of a pushy juice bag. So it's a different way of coming to the flavor that you get, and it is at a different altitude. And so if I even think about that from an aviation perspective, it feels like sometimes it might be easier to come down than go up, just the effort of it. And maybe that might be part of what's attributing towards, if I'm managing work and I'm a leader of work, why do I need to come up here? We want to go here. You're asking me to go in the backwards, is what it might end up even feeling like for an ET.
And to Derek's point as well, you know, sometimes when there's gaps, you know, for me being an IW, and you know, all of this is very eye-opening for me. I was like, oh, that's why that didn't work. So being an IW and at that time when we did this, not having any Ds and Gs, you know, me as a leader is like, oh my gosh, she's just like this dreamer who has all these crazy ideas that, like, we can't do anything with that. We can't do that, right? So, and to Derek's point, having that process in the middle is what has been and will be really helpful for me as a leader and dealing with the ETs. And again, I don't know how you do that in the reverse if you have an ET as a leader and kind of needs to fill in some of those middle and top areas. It's a little bit different challenge.
And I can't speak to how to do it, Jay. It's such a good point, but I think the common language of the working genius has allowed us to be able to call in. My experience of managing up I've been able to use this, right? And even with like folks on other teams that I'm not in a reporting structure with, but are leaders of people, like being able to call them in as well and sort of say like, hey, we're not wondering right now, or we're not, hey guys, we're you know, we're not solutioning yet. We're wondering right now. Like, so sort of being able to directionally, like, and I think it's interesting too, like the context of like the experience of, and I've done it too, like I come in and start doing my DG thing, like, oh no, we're wondering right now. We're not creating buy-in. We're not bringing everybody along. We're still wondering and inventing like how this is going to go. Yep. Like check. So like, it really helps to, even candidly, my team members managing up to me. I had someone recently reach out and say, hey, like, would you be willing to like not be on this call so I can lead it? And I'm like, 100%. It's very hard for me to sit on my hands. So, you know, that's been something I've been able to like create. That's created space. Like I can't fathom being able to ask your boss, like not to be in a part of a call without this language to sort of say like, hey, like I need to be the galvanizer in this call. Can you sit this one out? And like, number one, like I think about where we started with all this, and I was like, I feel like I have to be on every call to have someone say, I would like to be owning this. Like, it's such a joy, number one, but also that person then felt empowered to even ask for that. And there was context that they could ask that in, which, you know, I'd imagine is not always very comfortable, right? So to ask somebody as a superior. So just wanted to add that to the commentary.
I love you. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say something. I was on the line with the team at the table group yesterday, 2 days ago, and we were talking about really the biggest leading indicator for how much value the model is going to deliver to a team is it's become pretty clear that it's the amount that they use the language in conversation, like to what degree they actually talk about like, hey, I need to be the one to galvanize this meeting, or are you G'ing right now? Or is the amount that that's just talked about, that will pretty directly correlate to how useful it is. And that might, like I think for Jennifer, that might kind of translate into this tool that you all are building, but that's it. It's clear that that's just sort of been the case, and is probably a result of your galvanizing too, right, Claire? But that it's interesting to hear how the language creates that permission, but then in turn, the more you're using the language in the day-to-day, the more real and applicable and useful the tool becomes.
Agreed. And one of the things that you guys all know that I love to do is weave models together, because I've introduced you guys to a lot of work. And when we're talking about this, it makes me think too about weaving it in with the coactive, because a lot of you are familiar with the leading from the front, from behind, from beside, from within, and the field. And it imagine if you're in that, be able to lean into language, saying like, I know you're same scenario, but maybe they wanted you there and not to take it on. It's like, can you G from behind to let me try doing that from the front? Or even recently when, Claire, I know you partnered with DASA in a project, and it's like, let's G from together, because you guys did that beside on a call. And if you get deliberate, like that's what this language has helped to. It's not to get this culty language that we're all speaking in this weird way. It's more that it's so much more specific. You actually understand what you're being asked for and what you're asking of the system or people in any given moment, which is then, it relaxes the space. The field changes, right, in that moment when you all hear and understand each other different.
Curious,
Yeah.
Claire, have you like outwardly given your team permission to give you active feedback and to like, I just would love to replicate whatever utopian world you just created over there, and have people raise their hand to lead meetings and take things on. Is there anything that you think you've done to set up that safe space?
Yeah, I think it's I certainly feel like I've been leading with empathy. I think we all have, right, during this difficult time, but like, so being empathetic. And one thing I say all the time is, if I say something that is going to break a system or is counter to what you think, don't assume I've thought of everything. And I say it just like that. Like, don't assume that I've thought of everything you thought of. If I say something that doesn't jive or doesn't land, or will break a system, you have to tell me. And like, just being receptive to that feedback, right? And I think also creating space for connectivity with the team members. I have a 7-person lead team. That's a lot of commitment of time, right, for one-on-ones every week. And really try to do it every week, just to, not least of which I think is the space we find ourselves in, right, in healthcare right now. But that's, I think it's a big piece of it, sort of a trust building exercise, and sort of being vulnerable in the, empowering them as the experts in the trenches, and sort of saying like, hey, like, I may be up here having like discerning and galvanizing, but make sure, it's something I do have to remember to do too. I have to remember to actively sort of be like, check in and say like, are you needing some galvanizing right now, or sorry, are you needing some discerning right now, or do you just just need me, are you just venting? Because I will discern immediately, like, here's 7 steps to solve that problem for you, right? You're welcome. Like, that's not necessarily what everybody wants and needs all the time. So making sure I try to check in and say like, are you wanting me to discern with you, or would you, hey, vent away, like I'm here for you. So it's a little bit of that too. And I think really just that I really am candid. Like, I say it a lot and often, like, if I am telling you to break something, please tell me, like, I need to know that. So I think that's part of it. And I think the other sort of thought I had as we were sort of talking through this was really just around the it's not just a way to feel better around the language, like it actually is a more efficient way to work, which is a big piece of it. So it feels like a lot of fluffy stuff, right? Like, oh, or, you know, we talk about our feelings and like, what, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, this is really like, and Justin mentioned it, like you said, like, oh, you know, you interacted with somebody and they said, you saved me 5 hours of time trying to figure this thing out. That's what the Working Genius has really done, is we think about pulling people together in different ways, is to share experiences, to say, like, we think about it in digital a lot, right? Like, hey, I'm trying to launch a new, you know, display advertising campaign. And, you know, I have anecdotal stories where somebody was trying to do that by themselves. And if they had had somebody to ask, they would have, honestly, she's like, it would have saved me 2 days of work, right? So the idea of sort of creating a space where there's just connectivity. So just sort of shining a light on things and sort of trying to just, hey, have people see things together is it's more efficient, if nothing else, right? Like if you don't want to get into the feelings of it, it's much more, it's efficient, it's truly more efficient.
I'd like to take a stab at adding to your answer to Jennifer's question about what it is that you do that invites people to volunteer and speak up. Because my experience, because I do coach a lot of people on your team too, right, is that that you lead a lot from the field. You sense and you call in, and then everyone else has permission to do the same. A lot of times as a leader, when we sense things, we wait and have one-on-ones with somebody and ask them afterwards. And yet you found a very masterful way, I think, of being able to call something in without it feeling like it's calling out, checking in with people, like in the moment, in front of people, and that allows dialogue to happen. And you end up talking about your system does talk openly about problems rather than waiting to have it one-on-one. Is that true for you? Like, that's my observation, but does that feel?
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah, it is. And I think it's interesting you reflected that back to me. Sometimes it's hard to like see some of that stuff. I think for sure I do. I think I feel like I'm hypersensitive to some of that stuff in a virtual environment too. So if we're able to see facial expressions or just ask somebody what they're thinking, like, hey, I think what's going on for you? Like, what are your thoughts on this, as you see somebody sort of make a face or something? And I think also inviting as a leader too, like if someone has harsh criticism or, you know, like that's, you know, if strong feelings or whatever that is, like I welcome them to express that, you know, that's okay. And sort of, it allows me to synthesize or translate, you know, hey, like I can reflect this back to you and pull in some of my broader view of the organization and help put context around that for you. So, you know, I do think that is probably something that does happen, you know, and I think certainly I feel like I've been hypersensitive to it in a virtual environment too, like more so.
I'm curious, shifting the kind of along the lines, but I wanted to kind of zoom into meetings and what you're observing, Claire, in meetings, because I know you invited like Joe Peralt's team even to do this, but are you noticing that there's a way in which, you know, ever does this get weaponized? For example, have you ever noticed that, where it's like people are maybe corrective with this language, or that it's just, or that it's leaning into positive? I'm imagining there's a little bit maybe in both, in all environments, but what are you observing around meetings cross-functionally where this language?
It's interesting. I think it's not that it's weaponized. I think when we have meetings, so had one today with a cross-functional team from folks across the business, and it was not going well. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't going great. And I was sitting back, so I sort of like was able to observe like people focusing on the wrong detail, or, you know, sort of like trying to help people navigate what was actually sort of just a terminology program. Like somebody was saying one thing and it meant something different to another half of the business. So sort of, it's not that it's weaponized. I think it is, my experience is like, oh, I see what's happening. I don't know their letters, but I make assumptions. So, which can be helpful and can also not be helpful. So if I go like, oh, clearly this person is these letters, so I'm just going to swoop in here and be an awesome DG, you're welcome. Like that can be not necessarily helpful. So you do have to, it's with great power comes great responsibility is how I'll phrase that, right? It's the superhero's curse. So you have to think about it that way too. It's like we have this great knowledge and working information that not everybody has. So trying to use it for good all the time, right? On those in those examples and in those moments.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing there is it's not so much weaponized, it's just what's your underlying intent, because we as humans are naturally prone to diagnose and assess in the moment, and it can be so easy to be able to be like, oh, that person's definitely, you know, a WI or whatever it is, and that you have that sense of there, and it's to catch ourselves in that moment of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else observed any ways in which the people are leaning into this specifically in context of meetings? What about the altitude even? Like, does that ever come up? Are you able to bring an invitation of consciousness of like, what is this meeting even for?
We've started, and we've started even putting it in the meeting invite so that people know what altitude we are operating at. We've kept it with that ideation, activation, like those three levels, so that it's more easily understood by the subject matter experts who are also going to be joining the call, and they understand kind of what the intent is and what the intended outcome is from the meeting. Like, we are going to ideate here for this hour. We want to understand from your professional opinion, like, what is most important to you? What are your goals with this campaign? What makes the most sense? And then we will come back to you with our recommendation. So it doesn't leave that ambiguity in the meeting of like, well, why aren't you telling me kind of how it's going to come about? It helps set the parameters for that meeting.
Yeah.
So we've said we're going to trial that for a quarter, and then get back together as a team and see how that is working out. Because I have had I have some folks on my team who they need to know, like, what is the expectation and where are we going to end and what is the next step. So they've been really great at also making sure, like, Jen, we've got 5 minutes left. Can we get to next steps? Can we make sure that we're not leaving with question marks? Which has been really good.
Well, we'd love to hear your feedback when you retrospect on that, for sure.
Definitely.
So does anybody else have any questions for Claire or anyone else before we wrap up today?
It was great, Claire. Thanks for sharing all that information. It's really fascinating on my end.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for letting me chat.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's it is, I said it in the beginning, I'll say it again. It's just the way in which you innately galvanize would be, it's something to be even think about it. Maybe we can brainstorm a little bit about how to, do something creative with that, right? Because it's very much needed. It's just at Amerisourceburg alone, when we look at the population that we have there, it's very small percentage of GERS, even though we have a few here. It's something that's needed so much at every organization. Same thing with Khyber. You guys, I think, there's two. Am I correct, Ryan? There's two of you that are doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't mean that other people can't. It's just being intentional, right? So, well, I appreciate you all very much. And next time we're going to be having Chrissy and AJ, as I mentioned, in the email come, and we'll be talking a little bit about what it was like when they actually initiated this in the very early stages, and then now where they're seeing it move forward from different environments that they're in now. So we'll come back to that next month, and thank you all very much and look forward to that.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.